Today we're going to discuss and discover the cultural and ancient origins of necromancy. Because we want to know truly, what is necromancy? The cultural origins of necromancy. Religious, philosophical, societal contexts that shape the concept of communing with the dead. Going to examine some primary sources and get a nuanced understanding of how necromancy has been perceived and practiced. The study of necromancy reveals intricate interplay between human beliefs, cultural practices, and societal norms throughout history, shedding light on the enduring fascination with death and the afterlife. So necromancy at its core is a discussion of death and the afterlife. That is the basis of necromancy. Ancient origins of necromancy. Explore early instances of necromantic practices in ancient civilizations such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece. Religious, mythological beliefs. Medieval European necromancy. Christianity. Condemnation of witchcraft. Necromancy during the Middle Ages. Renaissance. Necromantic traditions such as the Ars Goetia. John D. Giordano Bruno. So we're going to go over some of these themes and communities, marginalized communities, how necromancy has affected them. There's some books on this. The Complete Magician's Tables, Golden Horde Press by Stephen Skinner. Forbidden Rites, a Necromancer's Manual of the 15th Century, Richard Keckheffer. Grimoires, a History of Ancient Books, David Owens. Arcana Mundi, Magic and the Occult in the Greek and Roman Worlds, George Luck. The Haunted, a Social History of Ghosts, David Owens. So let's delve into this. Mesopotamia. In ancient Mesopotamia, necromancy was tied to the religious practices of the time. My phone here is like... Mesopotamians believed in an underworld inhabited by spirits of the dead, where communication with these spirits was possible through various rituals. One of the earliest known practices comes from the Sumerians, who recorded incantations and rituals for summoning and communicating with the dead. These rituals were performed by priests or shamans, seeking guidance or knowledge from the deceased. Ancient Egypt culture placed significant emphasis on the afterlife, with rituals and practices centered around ensuring a smooth transition. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains spells and incantations designed to guide the souls of the departed through the underworld and protect them from malevolent spirits. These texts include instructions for communicating with the dead. Greece. Necromancy played a prominent role in ancient Greek religion and mythology. The Greeks believed in Hades, the realm of the dead. The most famous example of necromancy is the Oracle of the Dead at Ephyra, known as the Necromantion. Ooh, that is cool. Located in ancient Epirus, this site was believed to be an entrance to the underworld where practitioners would communicate with the spirits of the deceased. A Greek historian, Herodotus, described necromantic rituals performed at the Necromantion, including sacrifices to evoke the spirits of the dead. Here we go. The practices necromantic rituals often involved offerings, sacrifices, invocations to attract the attention of the dead. Priests, shamans, or specially trained individuals conducted these rituals using techniques such as chanting, trance induction, and divination to establish contact with the spirit world. Necromancy was not universally accepted in ancient societies, often viewed with suspicion or condemned by religious authorities as a form of sorcery or black magic. These laid the groundwork for development of necromantic traditions. Ancient practitioners of necromancy often employed various techniques to create the illusion of bringing people or animals back from the dead. So let's be very clear about this. Necromancers are people who would bring people, quote unquote, back from the dead. Do we know any famous examples, historical individuals who claim that they would bring people back from the dead and would do this on display? Maybe they brought themselves back from the dead. These rituals and tricks were aimed at impressing or convincing observers of their supernatural abilities. Here's some examples. Necromancers use sleight of hand, hidden mechanisms, or other theatrical techniques to create the appearance of a resurrected person or animal. This could involve hidden compartments and altars or props, smoke and mirrors, or cleverly orchestrated performances. By employing illusions, necromancers could enhance the mystique and perceived power of their rituals. Animal sacrifices. Some necromantic rituals involve the sacrifice of animals such as goats. I don't know what a goat is. Goats, sheep, or birds. The necromancer would perform elaborate ceremonies, often involving chanting, gestures, and incantations before sacrificing the animal. The sight of an animal being slaughtered and then apparently resurrected or manipulated through the necromancer's actions could create a powerful impression on observers, further enhancing the perceived potency of the ritual. Stagecraft performance. Necromantic rituals were often conducted in elaborate settings such as temples, underground chambers, or remote locations associated with death and the afterlife. These settings were carefully chosen to evoke a sense of mystery and awe. A necromancer would typically dress in elaborate robes or costumes using dramatic gestures and intonations to heighten the theatricality of the ritual. Audience participation and the use of props such as candles. One well-known historical record of necromantic rituals being performed is the description provided by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus regarding the oracle of the dead at Ephyra, also known as the Necromanteon. This site, located in ancient Epirus, was believed to be an entrance to the underworld where practitioners communicated with the spirits of the deceased. According to Herodotus, visitors seeking guidance or information from the dead would first undergo purification rituals, make offerings to the gods. They would then descend into the underground chambers of the Necromanteon, where they would encounter priests or priestesses skilled in necromantic practices. Once inside the dimly lit chambers, the practitioners would perform rituals involving sacrifices and invocations to evoke the spirits of the dead. Herodotus describes the use of libations, incense, and prayers to attract the attention of the departed souls. Herodotus describes how a visitor to the Necromanteon was instructed to sacrifice a black ram and then wait in a specific location within the underground chambers. After performing the prescribed rituals, the visitor claimed to have encountered the ghost of a deceased relative. The descriptions at the Necromanteon highlights the elaborate theatrical nature of ancient necromantic practices. Combination of ceremonial rites, symbolic rituals, offerings, mysterious settings contribute to a sense of awe or wonder. One example of a necromantic spell from ancient times can be found in the Greek magical papyra, a collection of magical spells and rituals dating from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century. These papyra contain instructions for various forms of magic, including divination, curses, and rituals for communicating with the dead. Here's an excerpt from a spell known as the Spell of the Sleep of the Dead, used for summoning and communicating with departed spirits. Place the lamp on the ground, say the spell for the sleep of the dead. Again, Dirk says I in context of colloquialisms or in this speech. So it'd be Dirk call upon you, but we'll read it as it is. I call upon you who have died prematurely, who wander in every place, who walk everywhere, to come to me, to speak to me, to tell me the dream which I shall ask you. Say it 7 times. This spell would have been performed as part of a necromantic ritual, likely in conjunction with other invocations, offerings, gestures, to attract the attention of the spirits and facilitate communication. And the lamp creates a solemn and mystical atmosphere to conducive the practice of necromancy. So this is done essentially during special times, mystical moments. People would know of eclipses, star signs, astrological signs. They would use this. People would be drinking heavily. There would be lots of smoke. There would be maybe in confined, dimly lit spaces. There would be tricksters, gears, mechanisms that would all contribute to this elaborate understanding of necromancy. In some ancient cultures, necromancers or practitioners of magic may have claimed to have the ability to spirit the shade of a deceased for communication. One example comes from ancient Greek mythology, where hero Odysseus visits the underworld and encounters the shade of the prophet Tiresias. In Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey, performs rituals involving offers and libations to attract the attention of the dead and gain insight into his future. Here's an excerpt from the Odyssey, where Odysseus describes his encounter with the shade of Tiresias. I drew the sharp sword from beside my thigh, and with it dug a pit 2 feet each way. Then round it poured libations to the dead, first honey mixed with milk, then wine, and third, pure water, sprinkling thrice a handful of flour. I called on the departed with kind words, promising offerings after my return, and while I prayed, my whole soul melted within me. It illustrates the ritualist nature of communicating with the deceased in ancient mythology. So communicating with the dead in ancient mythology was a commonplace practice, a common thing. Even in the Bible, we see excerpts of people speaking with the dead in the context of giving a warning about not living appropriately. In Romeo and Juliet, famously, we had Juliet drink a potion that made others believe that she was dead. Even Romeo believed she was dead and himself drank poison as a response. One example of historical practices involving substances with psychoactive properties is the use of henbane, Hyoscyamus niger. In ancient and medieval Europe, henbane contains alkaloids such as hyoscyamin and scopolamine, which can induce hallucinations, delirium, and altered states of consciousness. Henbane was used in rituals or potions by practitioners of magic or folk healers to induce trances or visionary experiences. So they would put these things into people's food as a way to give sort of mass hysteria. That is, if you're going to perform a ritual, you might hand out food or water or wine to a crowd of people laced with henbane, and that might give them more of a priming to accept supernatural events. In Haitian culture, in Haitian voodoo, it's believed that certain substances such as tetrodotoxin, found in pufferfish, can induce a death-like state in individuals. Now, while this was not a culinary thing in Rome, people in Haiti would use this fish, this puffer fish, all over the world, and all of them contain some element of this tetrodotoxin. And the effects of it were known throughout the world. So even though people didn't eat this, the effects of tetrodotoxin and the puffer fish were well known throughout the world. So in the 19th century, during the heyday of spiritualism and seances, spiritualist mediums would often claim to communicate with the spirits of the deceased, performing elaborate rituals and seances to convince their clients of their abilities. In some cases, they would employ various tricks and techniques, such as hidden wires, accomplices posing in spirits, and cold reading to create the illusion of contact with the dead. They didn't actually involve bringing people back from the dead, but they exploited people's beliefs in the afterlife. There were famous mediums such as the Fox Sisters and Eusapia Palladino, and they were later exposed. In addition, their practices are generally based on trickery, while substances like scopolamine affect cognition and perception. These things can dramatically affect people's ability to differentiate between reality and fantasy. So, the question here is, to what extent were drugs used in mass events in necromancy? And we see that the basic formula for necromancy is confined spaces, smoke, alcohol laced with drugs, food making people heavy, tired, sedated, rituals playing off people's already existing fears and supernatural beliefs. And what this does is primes people to believe in events and things, bringing back the spirits, their elaborate rituals, superstition, and all of this adds together to a general cultural practice, which may not be seen so much anymore after the seances of the 1900s proved to be fake. Many of them. Obviously, the rest of them were just assumed to be fake, and probably rightfully so. With that came the fall of traditional necromancy. Of course, gaining some power with the satanic movements, LaVey, and some of these others later on, but really dying out, so to speak, with the ending of the seances and the revelation of their not being real, because people really put a lot of effort into disproving this. Now, this is important because the same cultural understandings are not present in the ancient days. They actually believed in necromancy. Necromancy was a thing. Necromancers were a thing. There were very many necromancers going around doing necromantic tricks. Rome, Judea, Africa, Haiti, the New World, and of course, they hadn't been there yet, but these sorts of necromantic behaviors are emergent aspects of an understanding, comprehension of at least the basic workings of life and death, and the invention of an afterlife, and the shared invention of an afterlife, and the emergence of ways to talk to these ancients, discuss with them, and then evolving into bringing people back from the dead, literally having victory over death through necromancy, becoming a practice and then outlawed because, of course, like the seances of the 1900s, this was exploitative. It would get people into bad situations. They'd spend their money, maybe take advice that wasn't correct, and all of this would lead to bad situations. This is a basic introduction to necromancy. You're watching The Dirk Jensen Show. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.